Okay. So if there's anybody out there in the audience today that has any interest whatsoever in becoming a great storyteller, I have amazing news. You already are one. You're a fantastic storyteller. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking something like, oh wow, fucking hell, this guy's seen way too many TED Talks. but I really mean it. It's absolutely true. Assuming that you're in possession of a basically functional human brain, you have at your disposal a device that's been shaped by millions of years of evolution to tell and to understand the world through stories. And by understanding exactly how it does this, not only can we make ourselves better storytellers, but we can even glimpse answers to some of humanity's most profound questions, such as how should I live my life well and happily? And even, what is the meaning of life? So, as Herb said, I've spent my life telling stories. I'm a journalist and I'm a novelist and I write all these kind of sciencey non-fiction books. But I'm also a teacher. And for the last few years, I've been kind of traveling the world, teaching writers how to use science to make themselves better storytellers. And my interest in the science of storytelling began around a decade ago. And I was researching a book on the psychology of belief. And at the time, I was also kind of struggling with my first novel. And because I was struggling, I bought all these books on storytelling. And so I started reading all these books. And I noticed something weird. And that is that the things that the storytellers were saying about how to tell stories were the same as the things that the psychologists I've been interviewing have been telling me about how we experience our everyday lives. So the scientists and the storytellers had started off in completely different places, but had ended up discovering the same things. So that was weird. But then I realized it actually makes perfect sense, because story is what brain does. Story isn't something that was designed by clever people hundreds of years ago writing with quills. It's more like a product of biological evolution. So story emerges from human brains as naturally as breath emerges from between human lips. And assuming that you're in possession of a sort of basically healthy one, you're going to be spending a lot of your time experiencing your lives as if you're the plucky hero at the center of an unfolding plot, struggling against great odds to make a better life. So by interrogating how the brain does this, we can get to these clues and hacks on storytelling, and I'm going to share just 6 of those tips with you over the next sort of 10 or so minutes. So the first one, so all story is change, that's what it is. Whether it's a 60-word news piece in a tabloid about Kim Kardashian's shoe falling off, or it's a 1,200-page work of high literature like Anna Karenina, all story is change. Now, why is that? It's because brains are obsessed with change. They have to be, and for lots of interesting reasons, but one of them is because of a peculiarity about how our senses work. So we think our senses are amazing, but actually, with the exception of the skin, our senses give very limited and partial information to the brain. So if you hold out your arm and look at your thumbnail, that tiny dot in the center is all you can see in high definition and full color at once. Color ends around 20 to 30 degrees out of that high definition core, and it's all fuzzy outside of that core. So how is it then that we feel that we can see so perfectly? Well, it's because the brain is obsessed with change. That big fuzzy area outside the high-definition core is sensitive to changes in your environment, and when your brain detects those changes, it sends that high-definition core out to investigate it. And your eye's constantly doing that. It's the fastest movement in the human body. It's called a saccade, and you do 4 to 5 saccades every single second. And so now imagine your face, not as a face, but as an amazing machine for detecting change. There's barely a millimeter on it that isn't dedicated to it somehow. So you're walking down the street, you're not really aware of what's going on, you're thinking about some argument you just had with some idiot on Twitter or something, and there's change in your environment. There's like a bang, or someone calls your name. What happens? Will you stop? Your internal monologue ceases, and you turn this amazing change-detecting machine out in the direction of the change to answer the question, what was that? Now, psychologists call that an orienting response. And that's what storytellers are doing. They're creating moments of unexpected change, which are generating orienting responses in the brains of their kind of readers and viewers of their TV shows. And this is such an important principle that really good writers, lots of them, put these moments of unexpected change in their very first sentences of their story. So I'm going to show just a few quick examples here. You guys need a new clicker. Right, so here we go. First sentence of Where's Spot? Very famous children's book. That's Spot. He hasn't eaten his supper. Where could he be? So unexpected change, Spot's gone missing. But there's also something else in there. There's the threat of change. Where can he be? Where is he? We don't know. He could be under a bus. Oh, so there you go. So that's change and the threat of change in the first sort of 3 short sentences. Here's another one. J.K. Rowling, of course, we all know who J.K. Rowling is. First sentence of Harry Potter. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. So that's a great first sentence because it's absolutely pregnant with the threat of change. As storytellers, we know that something's going to happen to puncture that perfect life of Mr. and Mrs. Dursley. So that's, that's great. Here's another really good one. Charles Dickens. Marley was dead to begin with. I mean, that's amazing. Change and the threat of change in just 6 words. So that's really good writing. But I know what you might be thinking by now. You might be thinking, yeah, but these are all kids' stories, right? Surely the big literary gods aren't doing the same thing as Where's Spot? Well, how about Jonathan Franzen? Is he literary enough for you? So this is the first sentence, 2 sentences of Jonathan Franzen's literary masterpiece, The Corrections. The madness of an autumn prairie cold front coming through. You could feel it. Something terrible was going to happen. So Jonathan Franzen doing the same thing as Where's Spot there. And here's another one. Hanif Qureshi, another literary god, first sentence of his classic Intimacy. It is the saddest night, for I am leaving and I am not coming back. Change, that's what it is. And that's how your story should continue too. A really well-constructed story is a sequence of causes and effects. One change leading to the next change, leading to the next unexpected effect. And that's because that's how brains understand the world. So what your brains are doing is they're looking for these moments of change, and they're automatically building little stories about how one change led to the next. So we've got our moments of change. How do we make people care about our moments of change? Well, for the answer to that question, we have to go back tens of thousands of years to the era in which these brains were still doing much of their evolution. And for the vast majority of our time on this earth, we've not been living in sophisticated towns and cities. We've been roaming around in large hunter-gatherer tribes, and we still have these tribal brains. So life was very dangerous back then, and it was precarious, and we all had to work together to survive. And we all know what people are like. We're not so good at working together a lot of the time. So how did we manage that? How did we police a tribe of people without a police force? Well, we'd do it with gossip. We'd swap stories about people. And gossip is universal. It still is because we still have these tribal brains. And it contains valuable information. And it's information that back in the day would have kept us alive. Now, it's for this reason that many psychologists now argue that the reason humans evolved language in the first place is to swap gossip. And if this is true, its ramifications for storytellers could barely be more immense, because it means that all human storytelling emerges from gossip. So how does gossip work? How does gossip police a tribe? Well, how do you feel when you hear a gossipy story about someone doing something terrible to somebody else? Well, you feel a very specific and sometimes dangerous and ancient human emotion. You feel moral outrage. So moral outrage is really interesting because moral outrage motivates us to act. So when you hear that gossipy story, you're motivated to step in and rescue that vulnerable victim, and you're motivated to kind of want to see the transgressor, dealt with in some way. And in the modern reader who still has this troubled brain, that moral outrage translates as a motivation to keep turning the page and keep watching the movie, because we still crave primarily the experience of seeing that victim rise up and that villain dealt with. But what is a hero and what is a villain? What are these kind of nebulous terms? Well, the answer to that also lies in these ancient tribes. It's thought that the core kind of quality that we humans consider as being heroic and morally good is selflessness, whilst the core quality of what humans see as morally bad, villainous, is selfishness. And that's why in gossip and in story, very often you see heroes behaving selflessly somehow and villains being selfish. Because story is a kind of tribal propaganda for us tribal species. What it tells us over and over and over again is that if we want to be safe, We need to be selfless, see beyond our precious selves and into the wider tribe. Whereas, villains, people who can't do that, well, it's very dangerous for them. So moral outrage, it's the ancient lifeblood of human storytelling. Selfish and powerful versus selfless and vulnerable is what makes us care. And storytellers can trigger these effects in all kinds of different ways. So it can be very subtle and delicate, as in a story like Mrs. Dalloway. Or in The Grapes of Wrath, we don't feel moral outrage about a human, but about the weather. It's the drought that's forcing that noble Joad family out onto the road. So those are the two elements of your classic beginning. When something surprising and unfair happens to a character, we have to know what happens next. And this brings me to my next principle. Something has to happen next. Humans are active. We have to be the cause of effects. We are a goal-directed species. And this is such an important, it's called effectance motive, psychologists call this, and it's so important to the human animal that psychologists argue that effectance is as important for our sense of well-being as is food and water. So effectance is why solitary confinement is such a terrible punishment for human beings. Effectance is why when psychologists put people in flotation tanks and cover their eyes and ears, very quickly, within seconds, usually, they'll start making these little rippling motions with their fingers, because we just have to be the cause of effects. And it sounds mad, but those little rippling motions are ineffably heroic. Because when change comes, when trouble strikes, when it feels like all of the world has turned against us, humans act. And when we do, the most important thing of all changes. The hero herself expands who she is, learning and growing and becoming ever more capable of controlling the world. So there's another really important principle called eudaimonic happiness, because this is how we should feel. So eudaimonic happiness, psychologists who study eudaimonic happiness, which is the happiness that we get from pursuing goals that are meaningful to us, but somehow difficult, argue that it's actually good for our health. People high in eudaimonic happiness have higher levels of antiviral response and lower levels of damaging inflammation. Whereas further studies show that people who live their lives with a greater sense of purpose actually live longer than other people do, even when other factors are controlled for. So we're built for story. When we struggle successfully against great odds, we thrive. Okay, so then what happens? We snap into this story mode. When the train is delayed yet again, we're going to be late for our meeting. We snap into it. How am I going to get there? What am I going to do? How am I going to battle the obstacles that the great, greedy, powerful train company has thrust in my path? Standing on that windy platform, coffee in hand, we become David fighting Goliath, Luke Skywalker fighting the evil empire, the Joad family fighting the obstacles of the road. It's because the human brain is a hero maker. It uses an armory of tricks and biases to make us feel like we are heroes. It makes us feel that we're better looking than we are, we're more morally worthy than we are, we're smarter than we are. And it divines the world into a simplistic narrative of goodies and baddies. All right, so then what happens? What's the end of a story, the classic end of a story? Well, what does the brain ultimately want? Well, what the brain wants is the answer to a simple question. How do I control the world? When unexpected change happens, when chaos strikes, what do I have to do and who do I have to be in order to control it? Well, in the perfect archetypal ending, we find our answer. After a plot filled with escalating, dramatic, unexpected change, for one amazing moment, our hero has complete control. They have control over their inner world, over who they are, and over the external world too. So when Luke Skywalker finally finds it within him to destroy that Death Star, for one amazing moment, he has become God. He has control over everything. And that is ultimately what all storytelling is about. As the famous psychologist Roy Baumeister says, life is change that yearns for stability. Change is a fact of life, but it's terrifying. Story is a form of play that teaches us how to manage it, control the world. It's a roller coaster, but not one built from nuts, bolts, and steel rails, but from love, hope, dream, fear, unexpected change, and moral outrage. And what else is there? Because we all know how this story really ends. You're going to die, and so is everyone you know. And then there's going to be heat death. All the change in the universe will cease, and there will be nothing left of anything but infinite dead, freezing void. So in the face of that awful truth, the only thing we have to keep us going are our amazing, thrilling roller coasters. Thank you very much.